So it turns out that conservative economics is wrong. Oh wow, big surprise. Well, new research pretty much confirms what we had already been saying, what we had already been guessing for a long time. And that's that tax cuts for wealthy people don't create jobs. Instead, the research says that tax cuts for the poor and the middle class are the engines of job creation. And before I throw it to you, Ron, I just want to say that this comes from a working paper from the National Bureau of Economic Research.
Mm-hmm.
So they did this research over some time here, and they looked at the short and to medium term impact of tax changes at the state and federal levels, going all the way back to 1948, and found that tax cuts aimed at the bottom 90% translated to job growth about 2 to 5%. However, when you give a tax cut to the rich, the top 10% of earners, it has a negligible effect. And tax decreases, however, for most of the population, generated 5% of employment growth. But when you apply it to the top income bracket, there was no noticeable growth.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I mean, I don't think this is at all surprising. I mean, I think the whole concept of Reaganomics has been disproved many, many times, and continues to be disproved by the way that every time there's a corporate loophole out there, more people, at least domestically, lose their jobs. Because costs are cut in other areas so that the CEO can take home more. And, and there's a lot of economics now that supports that, which is a good thing. I mean, it's one of those things where, you look at some of this stuff on paper and it might make sense, but that doesn't factor in human behavior.
Right.
And that's kind of one of the flaws of the discipline in general. Like it doesn't always factor in the way human beings are going to behave. And when you give this mass amount of people more money in their pocket, they're probably going to spend it. They're going to live their lives. They're going to have more leisurely money. When you give an elite wealthy group even more money, they're probably just going to, invest it, or it's going to benefit an elite few. And they're probably not really concerned with putting it back into the company. I mean, you hear every now and again, you hear these stories of a CEO taking a pay cut to hire the wage of the employees and stuff like that. That's a rarity. That's the exception to the rule. More often you hear about situations where the CEO is making 475 to 1 to all the other employees because we have complete unchecked predatory capitalism in this country.
Yeah. You talk about the assumptions behind some of the conservative economic models, and that's exactly what it is. They assume that, wealthy people are going to invest it back into their business. Not always. In fact, a lot of times, the only investment they go into doing is making stock buybacks, which only inflate their stock prices and make them even more wealthy. They don't actually put it back into hiring more hiring more workers, because they don't have customers. They don't have as many because most people can't afford their goods anymore. What good is hiring more people if you don't have customers? But that's the assumption that they make. And that's why it's wrong. Going back to that whole human behavior thing, people who are poor, middle class, spend a large majority of their whatever they get in their income, they spend it on basic necessities to survive. So that money always continues to be in circulation. Whereas somebody who's incredibly wealthy will either do a stock buyback, which doesn't benefit really anybody but the corporation itself, and the wealthy doing, the stock buybacks themselves, and the board, of course. So it benefits a very few people.
Yeah. Or in other situations, people overextend their assets and then they end up bankrupt themselves, and then it's just a whole other mess. And then poor people get blamed.
Sure. And we see that a lot. We see poor people being blamed a lot for the economy and for being poor, themselves. I mean, it really disturbs me when you have people that blame poor people for being poor. You didn't work hard enough. If only you worked hard enough, like we do, then you would do better. And there's plenty of research out there that disproves that whole notion too. It makes me wonder when some people or most people are going to actually start looking at the data and going, you know what? That's right. Giving more money to already rich people doesn't really help. But if we give more money to, and look, not just money in the form of entitlements, as they would call them, but actually in tax credits. For example, this paper points out a couple of policy ideas that would actually help the economy, and it would be more tax breaks for the poor and the middle class. For example, an expansion of perhaps the earned income tax credit, which targets working families. That would be a good policy prescription to helping reduce those levels of income inequality and rewarding work. I thought that's what we wanted to do.
Well, I think that's what some people want to do. I think that a lot of people, they're not concerned about the income inequality in this country. They're not concerned about the incredible gap between the rich and the poor, which is pretty much all we got at this point. The middle class is almost just completely eliminated. And so I don't think a ton of people are concerned about that right now. And I think this goes into, they should be, but I don't think they are. And I think this kind of goes into what we talked about a couple weeks ago. I forget what the story was, but one of the kind of, notions that got brought up is this whole kind of bootstrap mentality that's still very strong in this country. So I think there's still this whole stigma where it's like, well, of course you got to work hard and pull yourself up, and you got to, don't criticize the 1%, become the 1%. And it's like, well, but wait a second, we have to have some type of policy so that there's like some type of fairness in all this, but otherwise we're going to have this ridiculous gap that no other countries like us have, and it's gotten out of hand now, and I think there still aren't a lot of people concerned about it.
Well, and there's that problem of lack of economic or opportunity, or of equality of opportunity. Now, nobody's asking for equality of outcomes, right? We're asking for equality of opportunity, and when you start out behind, for example, massive student debt, you start out behind, you're not going to be able to catch up, and certainly you're not going to be able, or it's going to be a very, very difficult road to be able to pull ahead or to even break even in this, especially in this economy, where most people don't have the money to be able to drive the economy. And services are being slashed, and at the same time, we're cutting corporate taxes, and we're also cutting taxes on the wealthy in the form of, once again, the inheritance tax. Things like that. I mean, that's not helping our economy. That's not helping at all.
Yeah. No, I think we're reaching a point of crisis, and I think there's already been some response to it. I just think more people have to start being proactive about it and have to recognize the problem. But to kind of, make some, and put a little bit of optimism here. We have a different creative class like we've never really seen before. I mean, just even the stuff with what we're doing right now, content creators, stuff like that. People are responding. I think it needs to continue and it needs to escalate. But I almost feel like that's the only way to kind of combat what's gone on. Because really, we live in an age of complete predatory capitalism. And until people start demonstrating through their daily habits that a change needs to occur, then and only then will policy follow. It's not going to happen the other way around. You're not going to just get this policy that's more favorable one day out of the blue.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, fair enough. But we just have to continue, I think we have to continue educating people and showing people that, first of all, dispelling the notion that poorer people are lazy. I think that's got to be one of the number one things that we try to do, is to change the perception of the poor. It goes back to messaging on how we've received this message over and over from people who are conservative, that people who are poor got there because they were lazy, they weren't willing to work. And that's even come around to some, Democrats. I mean, Bill Clinton with his welfare reform, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's another thing. Well, we just want to get people off welfare so that they work. Well, most people on welfare do work. Most people getting assistance do work. It's not that we have a lazy entitlement society. It's that the people who are on these entitlement programs are there because they can't afford basic services even with a job.
Right. Well, and this goes into the whole, unchecked predatory capitalism, the wage gap. Nobody, and I've been saying this a lot recently, especially with what's been going on with McDonald's and everything there. Mm-hmm. Nobody in a country with the amount of wealth that the United States has, nobody that works 40 hours a week at an honest job, no matter what that job is, nobody shouldn't make enough to live. It's ridiculous. And you have these people that are working multiple jobs that still just don't even have enough to get by. It shouldn't be legal. If you can't afford to give somebody that's working 40 hours a living wage, then, that's a problem. And
not only that, but we look down on those people too. Not us personally, but as a society, we look down on people who are working fast food as if they're, failed somehow. But even if everybody was a winner, you'd still need somebody to, serve your fries.
Sure. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions too. I don't know if it's necessarily like everyone looks down, but I think there's also a lot of misconceptions. Like a lot of people are saying like, well, the people working at the McDonald's, they're just high school kids. Why should they get, and it's like, well, that's actually not entirely true. A lot of statistics have shown that that's not the case. A lot of times, the people working these jobs, they have families. A lot of times they're adults. A lot of times, and if they're working full-time jobs, they need to have a living wage. But, a lot of these corporations have found their way around things. And it's just reached a level of crisis, I would say.
Also, speaking of high school kids, when there aren't enough jobs for adults, good paying jobs for adults, they're going to go and displace these high schoolers so that they're out of a job too. And it gets them, it makes it a little bit harder for them to start out as well and to buy their first car and to, start saving up for their college. And it kind of robs them of opportunity as well. So, I mean, it's a problem for everyone except for those that are at the very top.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're, our contemporary society is just a very good case study at why, studies like the one we referenced for this story are in existence and are pretty sound. Because, I mean, we're a case right here where just benefiting the wealthiest of a society. It's not working. It's like that game that, I don't know, like if you ever, there's this game that we played in one of my classes in college where they randomly passed out, I think it was like tennis balls or something like that. And it was just random. And some groups got like 5 of them. And some groups got like 2. And some groups got like one group got 1. And the whole thing was, okay, your objective, the way you win the game is you want to get as many balls as possible. But here's the thing, you guys that got the most right away, you get to make up some rules. And you guys that didn't get as many, you can try to make up some rules, but your rules have to be approved by the people that have the most. And of course, within minutes, the group that got the most up front, they had everything and nobody else had anything. And, it's not a perfect model, but it's kind of close. And it kind of, goes into what we're saying here.
Yeah. The only thing that we did, when I was in high school is we, for econ, we played Monopoly. And what would have been a great representation of today is if they had started us out on Monopoly and given one person control of almost everything. That would have been more representative of our system.